Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing craft and creative business. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn, and this is episode number 753 of the podcast, and it is Friday the 31st of May 2024 as I record this. In today's show, I'm talking about the seasons of writing and life with Jacqueline Suskin. We discuss fast and slow forms of creativity, improvisational writing, how the different seasons manifest in our writing and energy, why you need to rest in order to create, how to decide what goes into a collection of work, trusting emergence, and much more. I really love this discussion, so that's coming up in the interview section. In publishing things this week, the Always Take Notes podcast, which has some interesting things with authors and in publishing, has an interview this week with a children's author who is also editorial director for picture books at Bloomsbury. Pari Thompson has insights into the different terms and terminology used in children's publishing, and what words are used in the publishing industry for each age, how genre has evolved for children's books, whether children drive book sales or whether it's parents, grandparents, librarians, etc., working in publishing, and more. So I know I don't often mention children's book stuff because I don't write them myself. I have occasional interviews on them, but I thought this particular interview was interesting at the intersection of this person who's an author and in Bloomsbury Children's imprints. So very interesting there. Also, the Alliance of Independent Authors has a blog post on how to market a memoir as an indie author. It includes being specific in your writing and marketing, offering readers value beyond the book, writing pitch emails and more. And there are insights from Rachel Herron and Ros Morris, both of whom have been on the show several times each, with hopefully many more to come. And in AI news, if you're still worried about using AI as part of your book cover process, have a listen to book cover designer Stuart Bache on the Brave New Bookshelf podcast this week. And of course, you can go back to the various episodes I've had on the topic as well, but it's interesting to hear Stuart talk about his process. Also, all the tools that book designers use pretty much now have generative AI in them. Many of the stock photo sites are either generating their own AI images or allowing the sale of other people's AI-generated images. So it's really good to hear Stuart talk enthusiastically about the fun of using the tools himself, but also using them together with his kids as a creative game. And I certainly think it is a lot of fun. And the word fun comes up over and over again with those of us who use AI tools. And it does definitely make the creative process more fun. Also, staying with AI, OpenAI has signed licensing deals with, just this week, The Atlantic, Vox Media, which includes brands like The Verge and News Corp. And this is just for news with News Corp. It includes the Wall Street Journal, the Times, the Telegraph, the Sun and others. But I think this is also interesting as News Corp owns HarperCollins. Now, this was a specific press release for the news element, but given that Penguin Random House is already using AI as part of its business processes, as reported by Jane Friedman on the Hot Sheet the other week, it's another step towards publishing using these tools in hopefully more effective ways. And I sure hope they're using these tools because it can help with surfacing books in the backlist, administrative tasks, marketing copy, and we all want publishers to run their books better, both as readers and as authors. So that's all on the OpenAI news. And obviously they've done lots of other licensing deals. So it's going to be very interesting how this shakes out. In my personal news, a desperate quest, a holy relic, a race against time. Yes, Spear of Destiny is now out on Kickstarter, jfpenn.com/destiny. And at the time of recording, it has reached just over £6,000, which I'm really happy with. I had a bit of an attack of the self-doubt demon. It never goes away. I mean, I kid you not. So I changed my goal. I had originally put 5,000 as my funding goal, and I put 1,000. And so I'm really happy to have made more than that 5,000 already. And there is, as I record this, 18 days to go. So depending on when you're listening to this, it will either be happening or it will be over. But yes, go check it out, jfpenn.com/destiny. That will redirect after it is finished. So yes, this is book 13 in the series. I was worried that people wouldn't buy it, but actually I've been able to do bundle deals, which quite a lot of people are buying. It did fund very quickly. Thank you to everyone who's backed it. And of course, there are the gorgeous signed silver foil first edition special cover with photos and all the things, as well as the usual ebook, audiobook, paperback, large print editions, bundle deals. And I have a webinar on discovery writing, which is kind of aimed at you. It is aimed at my writing audience. I also put up my hand-edited manuscript. So my creative process is to write in Scrivener. I do the first drafts in Scrivener, then I print it out and I hand-edit that. And that is the copy I've already sold it. I didn't think anyone would buy it, but there we go. It got bought within the first day. And it also includes all the books and the webinar and all of that. So I thought that might be interesting for you in terms of, depending on your process, perhaps you have manuscripts or other, I guess, ephemera. I think they're sort of called, the things that disappear. And I was talking to a friend the other day and she said, oh, no, I just throw all that away. And I'm like, okay, stop now. Stop throwing it away. And it might be something you can use in crowdfunding because, I'd certainly be really interested in that kind of thing from an author I supported. So yes, there's an idea. Also, even if you're not interested in Spear of Destiny, you might find the sales page useful for your book launch, either for Kickstarter or just for a normal launch. And if you've never used Kickstarter before and you still are not really sure about it, I have posted a video with a transcript all about what it is, why it's so great for backers and readers, why it is more like a pre-order. It's certainly not a sort of help me, like some of these other crowdfunding platforms. It is for proper products, proper backers, proper buyers, and also why it's so important for authors and creators. And that is on thecreativepenn.com or links in the show notes, or it's also on my YouTube channel, The Creative Penn on YouTube. What is Kickstarter and why am I using it to launch? Another interesting thing from the feedback of my fiction email list for JF Penn is that many people still don't understand Kickstarter and they feel uncomfortable with using it for ebooks, even though once you start using it, you realize it really is very easy. BookFunnel makes it very, very easy and they have a great help team. So if you've never ordered an ebook before on Kickstarter or bought direct, it's okay. It's really easy. And yes, I'm selling it early, but I also decided to launch with the pre-order of the ebook live on the other platforms. So when I sent out the email to my list, I sent them the Kickstarter link, but I also sent them the pre-order link. The Kickstarter's live now and you get the ebook certainly and hopefully all the print and the audio in July. But the pre-order of the Kindle is now live for the 1st of September. And of course, not just Kindle, Apple, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, all of them. So yeah, I haven't done this before. On the other Kickstarters, I was just trying to drive the sales to Kickstarter, but we have to respect how people want to read, how they want to buy. And so yes, I decided to set that up this time and I'm driving some pre-orders. So that's pretty cool. You can get all the early things, early access, special books, etc. bundle deals at jfpenn.com/destiny. Links in the show notes, or just go to Kickstarter and search Spear of Destiny. Also, I am on the Wordslinger podcast with Kevin Tumlinson, talking about the challenges of writing and marketing book 13 in a series, why we both still like writing action adventure, and a few more things about being a sort of more mature indie author in this market. Might again help you with ideas for your books. You can find Wordslinger on YouTube or your favourite podcast app. So thanks for your emails and comments this week. On Adam's interview about mindset and video marketing, Laura posted on YouTube, "I needed this so much today. Thanks to you and Adam for helping me with my mindset. Hearing about another's success and willingness to keep pushing gives me the confidence to keep pushing too." Fantastic. Thanks, Laura. And on X, Nicholas Fitzgerald said, "I enjoyed this interview so much, I've listened to it 3 times already." Wow. I don't plan to do any TikTok, but nonetheless, it was inspiring hearing Adam's journey and common sense approach to writing and selling books. Absolutely. And finally, an email from Lauren, and I wanted to read this out, just a little snippet. It said, "I've forgotten, in the business planning and production side, that my writing is a craft. I can look at great artists and see their various periods in style and understand they aren't fully formed at the beginning, so I don't need to be either. Your interview refreshed my perspective and took away this panicked feeling of must publish perfectly now." Yes, and I wanted to mention that because this is so important. And in fact, if you go to Malaga in Spain, you can go to the Picasso Museum and see some of his paintings and art from his childhood, because that's where Picasso was born. And you can, pretty sure that is right, just because I'm ad-libbing this. But what I love about that museum is you can see where a prolific genius artist started, and you can see the different periods of his work until he found his voice. And this is what we have to remember. We aren't just fully formed from the box, and the books that we love are often from writers who've been working for years, and that's what we've got to think. We do not have to be perfect now or indeed ever. Humans are not perfect. So yes, embrace where you are on the author journey. So please leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com or on the YouTube channel, or email me and send me pictures of where you're listening, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. I love to hear from you. It makes this more of a conversation. So this episode is sponsored by Draft 2 Digital, self-publishing with support. And in fact, I was emailing this week with Draft 2 Digital support. They are super friendly. They are a wonderful customer service team who can help you, because sometimes that is what you need. Self-publishing can be hard enough. So if you can get some support, that will help. On Draft 2 Digital, you can publish ebooks to all the big platforms as well as library systems. You can also publish print books, and they can help you through that process too. They have formatting tools as well as an easy publishing system. I use Draft 2 Digital for my ebook distribution to Nook and now to Apple and to library systems and a whole load of others. I also use the excellent payment splitting for my co-written book, The Relaxed Author, with Mark Leslie Lefebvre. A great option if you're co-writing or doing an anthology or a multi-author box set. There are no charges for formatting or updating your book. Draft 2 Digital take a distributor 10% of retail price on sale. No upsells, no service packages, no fees of any kind. Set your price to whatever you want, even free. Make as many changes as you want to your book, update the cover, distribute it to any and every sales channel you want. It's your book, your choice, your world. They also have marketing tools and promotional opportunities available. And again, this week, I had an opportunity to submit to an Apple promotion through Draft 2 Digital. And you can also take part in Smashwords sales and more. Draft 2 Digital says your book is your priority. Our priority is you. We build tools and services that let you focus on writing while we take care of layout, publishing, distribution, print on demand, paperbacks, and more. Check them out at draft2digital.com, and that's with a number 2. So this type of corporate sponsorship pays for the hosting, transcription and editing, but my time in creating the show is sponsored by my community at patreon.com/thecreativepenn. Thanks to the 16 new patrons who've joined this week, and thanks to everyone who's been supporting for months and years. If you join the community, you get access to all my backlist videos and audio covering topics like creativity, AI, mindset, business, marketing, and I have tutorials and more. This week, I put out an article on why we need to try new things. And yes, I tried TikTok. But don't look for me because I subsequently cancelled it again. But I did try it. And so I wrote this big article on why we need to try new things, when to keep them and when to discard them, and how we know the difference for us personally, and why AI agents might help us with marketing very soon. Coming up this week on the Patreon community is a behind-the-scenes video on my book launch process, and that will give you ideas whether you're doing a Kickstarter campaign or a normal book launch. The Patreon is a monthly subscription, the equivalent of a black coffee a month or a couple of coffees if you're feeling generous. So if you get value from the show and you want more, come on over and join us. And thanks to all the patrons who've been supporting the show. Join us at patreon.com, patreon.com/The Creative Penn. Right, let's get into the interview. Jacqueline Suskin is a poet, author, speaker, and creative consultant. Her latest book is A Year in Practice, Seasonal Rituals and Prompts to Awaken Cycles of Creative Expression. So welcome to the show, Jacqueline.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I'm excited to talk to you today. But first up, just tell us a bit more about you and how you got into writing poetry and books.
Yeah, I've been writing ever since I was a little kid. I feel like I'm one of those people who just sort of knew at a young age that words were the world I wanted to live in. And I didn't really know what that meant for a long time. I didn't know I was writing poems. And then the older I got, the more I was familiarized with that world. And I thought, oh, I've just always been a poet. And so I ended up going to university to study poetry and getting a degree in poetry, and then just continued to kind of follow that. And it's really led me to some pretty incredible places, including it's led me to this project that I've done for a long time called Poem Store, where for about 12 years, my only job was to take my typewriter around to public places and write poems for people on the spot. So I really got this sort of direct connection with the way that people, just everyday people, connect with poetry. And that has definitely illuminated my path as a writer.
That is so crazy.
It is, yeah.
I mean, what possessed you to do that, and how did you make that a living? I mean, I have seen some people do that, but it always, as an introvert who just doesn't really want to speak to people in general, I just find that utterly terrifying. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it happened by chance. I just met someone in Oakland who was doing that, and he found out I was a poet, and he invited me to come try it with him. And I had just purchased a typewriter, which was so strange. Everything kind of aligned magically like that. And that was in 2009. And I did that as an experiment just to see if I could. And then I just realized almost immediately how special it was, and how it was sort of the perfect combination of my two skills. One is writing and the other is to connect deeply with people. And so I just let myself kind of follow it and see how far I could take it. And I had no idea it would become my full-time job. But that was very clear after about a year of doing it at farmers markets and just kind of continuing the experiment. I was like, I think this is more than an experiment. I think this is something I should probably really give myself over to. And once I did that, it definitely took root and grew into a huge project. I've written over 40,000 poems with Poem Store. And I don't really do it in public anymore because I just kind of got burnt out. It was a very young person's world to do that. And I had a lot of energy then. And now I'm a little older and I feel a little more protective of my energy. But in the midst of all of that, that's how I got books published. That's how I met people. You know, it was a really connective way to be part of the community and bring poetry to all types of different people.
Yeah, wow. 40,000 poems. That's kind of incredible. But on that, I mean, this is a very interesting thing. And I think goes to the heart of creativity, because I do know quite a lot of poets, and some poets insist that it takes a very, very long time to be happy with a poem and put it out in the world. But you were basically doing a connection and then a fast creative publishing type process. So how do you connect so deeply, so quickly, and then turn that into creativity and a finished product in a short amount of time? I know you're not doing that anymore, but how did you kind of change that mindset of it must take forever to do a poem to going so quickly?
Well, I like to hold both sides of it. You know, I still, even throughout that whole process, wrote books, and those poems did take a lot of time and craft and working with an editor, and the painstaking, beautiful longevity of a single poem being on the editing board is something I'm still really familiar with and love a lot. And then I think also there's this freedom in just being able to have this kind of poetic conversation with another person, which is basically what I was doing with Poem Store. And these poems that I would make in the moment, they're very spontaneous. So they're including that person's energy. And there's also a mystery there. Like I wasn't quite sure what I was going to write. And I didn't really know what I did write until I would read them the poem when I was finished. And I think, just yesterday, I work in a lot of schools now and just visit kids and kind of show them what it's like to be a poet, teach them about poetry. And I brought my typewriter to class yesterday. And there's something really magical that happens when someone has a typewriter. And I think that was also a big part of it. There was like this deep lure of how is this person being so vulnerable out here in the world writing poetry, but then also, wow, this machine from the past, this is sort of like a time travel opportunity.
Yeah, I imagine some of those kids have never even seen a typewriter.
Yeah. And there's something about allowing oneself to be free creatively like that. Like those poems had nothing to do with my ego, right? Like I'll never see them again. I didn't keep copies of them. Every once in a while, I would take photographs of ones that I really loved or something like that. But there was something so special about releasing that sense of control and the need for perfection and the need for such a clear, certain outcome that I think is actually really nice to apply to art making. And although I really do value the craft and the focus and will continue to write books in that way for the rest of my life, I also will always allow myself to slip into that more improvisational sense of writing, because I think it just allows me to, honestly, even just yesterday, it was a reminder that my imagination is this thing that's always growing and changing, and there's new language to uncover. And it feels like a challenge in a playful way. And I like, especially as being someone who is a writer for my profession, making any kind of outlet I can for that playfulness in my work.
Yeah, I love that. Well, let's talk about the books of poetry, the collections, because I'm also fascinated with this in that you have to choose poems to go into a collection, which are usually themed in some way. And I own quite a lot of these collections of poems. How do you choose the poems that go into a collection? How do you know when it's finished? As in, okay, I am happy that this represents whatever that particular point in time is, because it seems like quite a nebulous process.
Yeah, the choosing is really a fun process, because I think for me, what will happen when I know a book is coming into focus is I'll spend my time kind of reviewing what I've been writing over the last year or 2 years in my journals, and I'll see a pattern or a theme. Like, for example, I made a trilogy of books about my time living in California, and each book in the trilogy is about a certain place that I lived. And what allowed me to choose those poems was that I saw this beautiful kind of exploration of place. And I thought, oh, I have an entire book's worth of poems about my time living in Northern California. Oh, I have an entire book's worth of poems about my time living in Los Angeles, and then another for Joshua Tree. And I could see this theme. And so then I went back in and added to it and kind of thought about my core memories of those places and kind of patched in what I thought was missing. And with all my books, it's been a similar process of sort of noticing either there's a theme building up or there's a collection of poems that are based on place or a certain time in my life. So that's kind of how the choosing happens with this like reflection process. But then to know when a poem is done, I work a lot with clients like one-on-one who are trying to create books or trying to polish their poetry. And I always say you really do need to work with someone else at some point in the process so that they can say to you, yeah, this makes sense. This is clear. This is getting across the point you're trying to get across. And you need to have that reflection of another reader, someone else's eyes on it, to like give you the sense of closure that you might need. And not every poem is like that. Some poems randomly you'll write something that's just like, pow, that is done. That is good. I love it. And that's very clear. But I think that's very rare.
Yeah, I love that. So I want to also wonder about your poetry and in fact your books in general, because you have poems in this book, A Year in Practice. I tend to read poetry from a physical book. Sometimes I'll get an audio or maybe watch a video of a poet performing, but I'm one of those people who appreciates the physical layout of a poem. And that's often a place where people play with physical layout and the beauty of words on a page, as opposed to the beauty of the words. You know what I mean? So I wondered how you incorporate that physical beauty, or whether that's less important to you than just the words.
No, I do love that. And I love when people appreciate that, because that is a big part of the craft, deciding where to break a line, deciding what space goes between which stanza. And I think for my work, a lot of times I'll be creating something that the line breaks are giving the pause and the cadence to the poem. So I'm a huge fan of reading poetry aloud. Like every time I read a book of poems, I will read the poems out loud, because I feel like there's a lyrical song-like quality to poetry. There's a rhythm, and the lines and the way they break and the way that the words appear on the page offer that. There's spaciousness around certain words. And I think for my work also with the typewritten poems, then there's another quality of, this kind of tactile visual expression with the mistakes that I leave in, or just when the typewriter skips a beat, or when I go over a spelling mistake with just a few X's, because on my typewriter, there's no way to backspace or mend mistakes. And I think that things like that give a different life to poems. And especially if a poem is just a block on the page as like a narrative or prose narrative, which I do write poems like that a lot, I think it's definitely still an invitation to kind of slow down, because I think that's the difference a lot of times between just straight up prose or narrative fiction or something, is that you get this chance to have space around the words that are usually delivering something very, very macro, very large as a condensed space, and not as few words as possible, honestly. So.
Right. Well, let's get into A Year in Practice, because it's a great book. I really enjoyed it. And of course, people can listen to this whenever, because it does have all the seasons in. So let's just start on the kind of bigger level of how should we consider the seasons as they relate to a calendar year, specific writing projects, and also times in our lives? How might they overlay each other?
Yeah. When I was creating this book, I really, I look to the earth for many things. A lot of my life revolves around my connection with the planet. And especially as a creative person, as a writer, as a professional artist, I feel like a lot of times what I'm searching for, what I'm honing in on, is some sort of a methodology that allows me to have a consistent routine. And that changes throughout the seasons of my life, depending on what's happening in my life, what other work I'm doing, where I live, what personal things are happening in my world. And so I really noticed, okay, this project started many years ago when I lived in Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, the seasons are very subtle. You have to really be paying close attention to understand that there even are seasons, and what they're telling you is even more subtle. So I think for a poet, that's actually an incredible invitation, because I think subtlety is something that I love to lean into and kind of see what is really under the current of this. What small hints and arrows am I missing if I just kind of rushed through this? And subtlety asks you to look closer and slow down. And so I really learned about the seasons in a new way when I was living in Los Angeles. And this book kind of came out of that, where I was like, okay, in the winter, I need to give myself some kind of space to slow down and turn inward a little bit. And even if you're living somewhere where there isn't snow, or there isn't actual cold weather to deal with that kind of forces you to be in hermit mode, you need to give yourself that, because your body, your human body, kind of requires that. And there's not a lot of space for that in our society. And I think I did an interview with someone once about the book, and they were like, basically, your book is kind of suggesting that we rest a lot. So, yeah. I think that's a big part of the creative practice that can easily get overlooked, because we're really concerned with product and outcome. And it does feel really good to finish something, or to fully indulge in creativity and let yourself be really like fervent with whatever your ideas are. But I also think that noticing the season at hand and reeling it in for winter then allows you to kind of move into spring, where there is this charge, and there is a charge of energy that you can kind of carefully and slowly approach so that you don't get burned out. And then you go into summertime, and that's a major time of togetherness. Like, that's when we're together, when we're sharing our work, when we're taking in work, but in a group. I imagine always in the summer, it's like when you're allowed to fully be out and you're not having one foot in the door and one foot out like you might be in spring. And that care then kind of translates into the fall, where you start harvesting and gathering again for your winter introversion or for your winter seclusion period. And so there's a lot of energy in fall for sort of noting, what will I need in my creative cave, and what can I do for myself now? What can I finish now before I kind of start to turn off a little? So I love winter, and I feel that winter is a really appropriate time for creative kind of gestation. And then the seasons that follow, there's a lot of choice that's involved, where you made these choices to turn inward and to focus and to kind of calm and take your foot off the pedal a little bit. But then when you come back into action in spring, it isn't like you just then slam on the gas, because the truth is that winter kind of starts and stops for a long time, and spring is very moody. And that really affects our creative practice. It really affects our ability to kind of show up for our ideas that maybe we've been brewing during the winter time.
And on the bigger level, I was thinking, as I was reading the book, there are different phases of our life. So you mentioned that your poem store, you're not doing that anymore. That was like a phase of life that you have now moved on from. And we all have these seasons that the sort of macro level. So for me, for example, the perimenopause years were like a winter, in that I really struggled to do a lot, and I should have given myself more grace and more time, but it really felt like a winter, and I've come through that now, and I feel like I'm really in a spring, like a reinvention, but that's a sort of a number of years over different parts of our lives that sort of mirror, I guess. Do you find that they do mirror the annual sense?
Yeah, and I really like considering the seasons of our lives, and how I think the main thesis for this book is just, how can we remember what the energetic quality of this season is, and then apply that during our life whenever we need it. So sometimes we need a winter. We need to go inward. We need to rest and recuperate. And that might happen in the middle of summer. I think it's more of learning kind of this gift of this language that the seasons offer. The earth is just saying, like, here, this is what all the other animals and all the other plants are doing right now. You're a part of that. Maybe you could consider doing that also. And then thinking how that applies to the greater practice of just living, and kind of knowing, okay, I've memorized what goes on during this time of year for myself, or I've memorized what it feels like to sort of downshift. How do I apply that? I've done the work of memorizing it. So it's almost like now I can flip the switch. I can make the choice and say, that's the energy I need right now. But that doesn't really happen unless we give ourselves over to learning it and practicing it. And that's, I think, why I wanted to have the word practice in the title of the book, and to consider practice not just being creative practice and artistic practice, but truly the practice of living and engaging with life in a healthy and sort of beneficial way that might be forgotten very easily, because there's so many things in our daily lives that steer us away from that.
So as we're recording this, we're coming into spring, and I was telling you before we started recording that the sun is out here in the UK, and it feels like, yay, spring has finally arrived. And I love, in the book, you have this poem called Emergence, and I actually have on my wall, I have a little card that says, trust emergence, which I feel reminds me that something will emerge. And even if the garden's been bare in the winter, something will start to sprout. So can you talk a bit about that, like why that word calls to you, and how can people understand that will happen? Because I think it's really hard, hence why I've got it on my wall to remind myself.
Yeah, I think this really does just circle around the theme and the thesis of the book, of this like remembering, and even this concept of emergence, and like that something will emerge, something new will happen. You know, how incredible is it to see the flowers and the perennials all pop out of the ground every year. It's never something that I'm not in awe of. It always almost shocks me. And I think there's something in that that's like, yeah, change is the written law of the universe. It will always be happening. We will always be shifting and growing and changing. Something different will always emerge. That's the nature of life. But we forget that. We get stuck in these feelings that nothing will change, that things are the way they are. And I think that that's partially just what it is to be human. I think we get caught in our minds. We get caught in a feeling and we get caught in our bodies. And then we forget that, yes, like something new will come, and that as it does emerge, the way we respond to it, the way we notice it, the way we meet it, and what we do with it, and the pace that we do all of that with it really matters. And so I think kind of, again, that memorizing, well, how do you approach emergence? How do you keep yourself in line with the fact that that will come, and what will you do before it does? And I love using the metaphor of the plant world, because I think that the plant world is so reliable in this way, where if something emerges too soon from its cave of growth, from its like safe underworld below the soil, it might get killed in the frost, because that's what happens every spring. There are these frosts that happen where winter kind of makes its last stand. And if we're not careful coming out into the world after our moments of inward retreat, we could have the experience as well. We could get a little burned. We could get burnt out. We could get some idea that we bring to the surface too soon before we're really ready, could then get kind of snuffed out a little bit by the fervent energy of spring, and then things get lost. And I think that's kind of what I think of when I think of emergence.
You mentioned fervent energy there, which I love, because I feel that is the energy right now as we're talking. Everything's growing and it's a bit mad out in the flower beds. And this is a problem that authors have, is that often there are so many ideas. Like there are some people who struggle to find ideas, but many of us, I'm sure you included, are like, I have so many ideas and I don't know which one to focus on. And I wondered, since you do so many different creative things, how do you know when all these things are springing up and emerging? How do you choose your next project, whether it's a collection of poems or a full-length book or what all the other things you do?
Well, I'll try to stay in the logical realm with this, because for the most part, I actually think that that's a very intuitive experience. When I choose a project, it's usually because some kind of door opens. There is some pathway that is easeful, and I notice that. And I think that logically, like, and practically, what that looks like usually is, okay, I'm feeling my way into a new project. There's probably a few at once that I've been thinking of, and all winter, maybe I've been brewing these ideas. And then something will happen where I'll say, oh, okay, this is the easy way forward with this. And it's inspiring to me and it's easeful. So that's the thing I follow. And then sometimes that pitters out, and then I turn to the next thing. And so I think having your clear ideas of what are the things that would make you feel great? What are the things that would inspire you? What are the things that you feel energetically pulled to do? But then also, what ease comes with those things? Like if you choose a project and then suddenly the next day you notice that there's a grant proposal that just opens up that's in the same vein as that project. To me, I'm like, that's a practical sign to try and put my effort in that direction. And I think following those practical signs is also very, like, that's kind of what the earth does. When a plant is growing up and out of the soil, it's like, I'm going to lean toward the sun and I'm going to make this easier on myself. I'm not going to grow in a direction that would make my growing harder. So I think that that's how I focus on things like that. I let myself intuitively move towards what's easeful, because it's hard enough in the world to make a living in any way. And so I think that especially if your artistic practice is your daily job, then there's a lot that, that rides on the ease of what you choose.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm also intuitive, and we actually talk about intuition quite a lot on the show. So I'm glad you said that. And I feel when I want to tackle a project, like this is ready now. It's like it does emerge, it comes out. And some books, like one I'm writing at the moment, it's been years in the germination, since we're staying with that metaphor. But let's come on to summer, because you use the word celebration in the summer section. And this is something I and many authors struggle with, mainly because, in fact, someone asked me the other day in an interview, what's the favorite book you've written? And I was like, yeah, it's the next book. It's always the next book. So I wondered what you feel about this. Like, how do we celebrate what we have done, our past, as well as just moving on to the next thing?
Well, I think that's really interesting. I love the books that I've written, and I feel that there are some books that I've written because they were more of like a prompt, and they're more of something that was almost like requested of me, either to continue my career moving forward or just to get something out of my brain that I knew was kind of almost like taking up space. And I think that I don't judge like the reasons why I make things, as opposed to like just looking back and being like, this is a good book. I still feel that way. And I actually feel that way about all of my work. And that doesn't mean I don't have a favorite, but I do feel this sense of kind of letting myself just enjoy the successes I've had, and the fact that I've written 8 books and created over 40,000 poems in the world. What I love to feel is that actually anything that comes after all of that is just like a cherry on top. Like, I've already done all of this work that I'm really proud of. And I kind of let myself live in that way, instead of feeling this push and rush to be more or make more. I think, like, I haven't written a best-selling book, but that doesn't make me feel badly about myself. It's more like, well, but I have written 8 really great books that I am proud of. So there's something about, I think, like this comparison that can happen in the world of artistry that I try to steer away from, and just sort of like look at the facts. And I actually have in my book, Every Day is a Poem, which is all about kind of cultivating a poetic mindset and the practice of poetry. I talk a lot about reflecting on one's life and thinking of all of the skills that we have and all of the things that we have done and all of our accomplishments, but on a really simple level of like, I love to consider all of the experiences that I've had, all of the places I've gone, the friendships that I've nurtured, just the simplicity of being like, well, I've enjoyed cutting a cold apple on a really hot day with a beautiful sharp knife. And like, that feels like an accomplishment to me. So I think I spend a lot of my time sort of, if I'm reflecting, I'm just like, wow, I've done a lot. I've experienced a lot in this life. And instead of thinking that that's exceptional or special, I sort of think that every human could do that. It's just about reframing the way you see your life.
Yeah, I think I always just feel like I have so many ideas, so many books I want to write. And it's like once one is done and out in the world and I've released it and now it kind of belongs to everyone else, and I'm just excited about the next one. I think I struggle, like many people, with the rest section. There's always more to create. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I feel that way too. I have many projects that I'd like to complete in my lifetime, but I think there's something to be said about, and this has definitely helped me, about like just sort of practicing patience with all of that, because I've had periods in my life like where I have had a book come out every single year. And now for the past few years, that's been a little different. And I think at first, even like downshifting from my experience with Poem Store, which was just constant output, constantly creating and seeing this completed poem go off into the hands of a stranger over and over and over and over again, it really sped things up for me. And I think over the last few years, I've been practicing just slowness. And I have the word slow is written in huge letters right above my desk, and just reminding me like great masterpieces take a really long time, sometimes a lifetime. And I think the earth really shows us that also. And a year in practice is kind of revolving around that same idea of your whole life and all of the seasons of your life and what you create. It's all adding up to be this great masterpiece. It's not just like a book that's published in your hand. It's also just like every moment by the end of your life adds up to be this really incredible artwork. And especially if you approach it that way, especially if you try and practice living your life artfully, then I don't think there really are mistakes to be made.
Just coming back to that word slow, because it's so interesting. You have that. I mean, I've got loads of things written next to my desk on all my little bits of paper and quotes and things. I do not have slow, which is, I do have create a body of work I'm proud of, which I think that resonates with what you're saying. But what are some practices that can help us slow down, particularly in this world? A lot of authors now, we know we have to be on social media. We have to do things to keep our profile up so that people can find our books, because it's pretty noisy out there. So what are your suggestions for slowing down?
I think there's something in the creative practice that tells me don't grasp, don't rush. So I like to, if I'm working on something, especially even just a single poem, if I'm working on anything creative, I will check in with myself and be like, am I rushing? Am I grasping at something here? Or does this feel playful? Does this feel like I'm tending to a deeper emotion? And that doesn't mean I won't end up writing really quickly on the page some great burst of inspiration. It just sort of allows me to kind of review where I'm at internally. And I do think that that's probably my greatest advice, is just that rushing through anything, it can easily feel like, oh, I'm just following the blaze of inspiration. But if you look closer, sometimes if you just review the feeling, you might be like, oh, actually, no, I'm just trying to push through towards an outcome. And I don't think creativity really likes that. I think the muse or whatever, our imaginations are running rampant all the time. And if we slow down to tap into them, there's a lot there, but I don't think it requires us to be on the same pace as it. Like we can grab maybe one piece of that and then slowly kind of nurture it and take our time with it, as opposed to feeling this sense of, I got to rush and collect every little idea or image or concept that I have. I think I heard an interview once with Tom Waits where he was talking about where he was driving in the car and he would always think, you know, the muse is coming to me in these moments where I'm like on the highway in my car. And I'll say, muse, don't come to me now. I'd have to pull over on the side of the road. And I thought that there's something about that. I might be misquoting it, but there was something about that like really struck me when I was younger, where number one, if I have an idea in the middle of the night, I'm going to turn the light on and write it down in my notebook. But then I think over the last couple of years of practicing slowness, I've thought a lot about just letting poems kind of pass through me and not feeling so pressed to document everything. And that has actually released me from that feeling of pressure. Like you can have a really brilliant idea and it can just be a brilliant idea that kind of moves through your body and that's it. And that's how it lives in the world. And it doesn't become something. And there's like a great freedom in accepting that, I think.
Yeah, I guess in social media, there's this sort of thing, if you don't take a picture of it and post it, it doesn't exist. It didn't happen. But similar, we don't need to share everything. Not everything needs to be documented. And so I like that kind of letting go. But let's come to autumn, because again, in the book, it's so interesting. You do use this phrase, when the veil is thin. And I use that phrase pretty much in all my novels, in my memoir, as I feel this in certain places and certain times, spiritual places, different times of year. But what do you mean by the veil being thin, and how does it manifest in your work?
Well, I think specifically in autumn, there's a sensation of being very close to death because everything is losing its vibrance. All of the green is gone. The leaves are falling. Everything is starting to go to sleep. And so beyond the veil is winter, is the period of rest, is like the inner cave. And I think when we're kind of hovering before going fully in there might be this opportunity to receive some information. And so I think like receiving information in these moments where we feel like close to death or close to kind of our hibernation mode, that maybe our minds are a little bit slower. Maybe we're like just starting to slow down. And so we're able to receive something on a different level than just this like daily grind of like mental reception. It's actually like, oh, maybe there's something that's a little bit quieter that's talking to you, that wants to share information with you. And I'm speaking of that in a planetary sense, but I also think as the earth is calming and turning down, and maybe there's a lot of gathering happening. Like if you think of all of the squirrels preparing for winter and they're doing this great method of gathering all of their food and preparing, there's a sense of us doing that also. And I think as artists and just as people, we're like preparing for this inward turn that comes with that time of year. And if we kind of allow ourselves to look at that, there might be this great like information download that happens then. And I think when I'm thinking of the veil being thin, I'm thinking of that quietness and that chance for this sort of maybe an exploration of something a little more spiritual or unseen that we don't necessarily have time for, or that we overlook in other moments of the year.
And have you experienced that in any particular places?
Yeah. I mean, as I said, I'm an ecstatic earth worshiper. So for me, like all of that information usually comes from being in places that are less populated by humans, or being in the forest, or even just being in the park. But I think being in the natural world and having that chance to kind of downshift into that quietness, I think that is when I typically will receive either intuitive information, or my imagination kind of comes into a different play. And I've had a lot of spiritual experiences. I think the veil can be thin no matter what the time of year is. I just think that sometimes in the fall, it's a little bit more potent.
And of course, with the various festivals that happen, Day of the Dead, and it is a time of year when that is really focused on, I guess, a lot more this acknowledgement of death and the closeness of this other world that perhaps we don't live in every day, and certainly don't think about in the spring when we're just running around in the sun.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's next for you then? Because you have all these different things. You've got the varied poetry collections and books. What will you focus on next?
Well, I have a book of poems that's finished that I'm just kind of trying to figure out who the publisher will be. So I'll probably start putting my energy into that. I'm really excited about that book. And then, yeah, I have another idea for a book. And then I'm about to move into this house that my husband and I have been restoring for the last few years. And that will be a big shift in my life. I'll have a new studio space, and that always gives a lot of creative information. So I'm definitely gearing up for that.
Oh, yeah. Moving house. That's a big one, isn't it? That really does change the energy.
Yeah, a new season for sure. A definite new season of my life. And I'm about to turn 40 in November. I'll be 40. So there's a lot of big changes happening. And I think that I always know that creatively for me, space has a lot to do with what I create. And like, that means like mental space, physical space. And I think that I'm looking forward to that next chapter of having just a more grounded space and being able to settle into my home that I'll live in for the foreseeable future.
So where can people find you and your books online?
Well, I have a website, JacquelineSuskin.com. I also have a Substack. If you look my name up on Substack, I do a lot of writing on there, and Instagram, jsuskin is my Instagram. And I try to keep all of those things kind of updated and put out a newsletter every month. So that's a good way to find me. And my books are anywhere you want to find a book. You can find my books for the most part.
Great. Well, thanks so much for your time, Jacqueline. That was really interesting.
Thanks for having me.
So I hope you found the discussion with Jacqueline interesting, and that it helps you pay attention to your creative energy at different points in the seasonal year and also in your life. And perhaps be a bit more playful in your work, and also maybe rest a bit more. And I know I always need to tell myself that, so maybe you need to hear that today. So let me know what you think. You can leave a comment on the podcast show notes at thecreativepenn.com, or on the YouTube channel, or message me on X at thecreativepenn, or email me, joanna@thecreativepenn.com. Coming up later this week is an in-betweeny-sode on writing action-adventure thrillers with tips from me and excerpted clips from previous guests. So I haven't done this for ages, but in the next episode, I'll be clipping these various bits from episodes and then stitching them all together. So I'm pretty excited to share that with you. It is another craft episode. Then next week, I'm talking about click testing, ideas and selling direct with Steve Piper, which is definitely business and marketing focused. So lots coming up. And in the meantime, happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You can find the backlist episodes and show notes at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. And you can get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on Facebook and X at The Creative Penn, or on Instagram and Facebook at JFPennAuthor. Happy writing, and I'll see you next time.